Hey, so I'm sharpening tools today. I do it once a year, and I thought I'd take you on the journey of how I sharpen all my tools and kind of simplify it for you if you don't have all the fancy stuff that I have. All right, so first things first, you want to use a sandpaper to address the edge of your tool. Now, of course, you don't have to do that if the tool that you've got is brand new and is already pretty sharp, or maybe just needs a little tuning up. But let's say your tool's got a few little tiny nicks in it. Maybe it's just not quite as sharp as you'd like it to be. That's how most of my tools are, and that's kind of the name of the game for today for me, because, you know, again, once a year I take these all down and I sharpen them. Some of them have little nicks, some of them have bigger ones. If the tools have a bigger nick, I'll use 220 grit sandpaper. That's this here. This is called a WorkSharp 3000. WorkSharp 3000 spins at a slow pace, kind of makes quicker work of sharpening than if I were just to use a simpler method, which I'll show you guys in a bit. If you don't have as many tools, you don't need to go ahead and invest in all this fancy equipment. You just need some sandpaper and tape. But I digress. 200 grit sandpaper for the tools that are more damaged or maybe need more attention. They're not quite as sharp or have problems. But most of the time, if it's just a little dull, not quite cutting cleanly, I will use 1,000. This is 1,000 grit. So this is a little bit of a change up from what I usually do. So the 1,000 grit, again, for the tools that are already pretty sharp, I'll just touch them up with that. Then I'll come over here to my buffing wheel. The buffing wheel is just a piece of cotton that is stitched together in a 6-inch ring that attaches to a bench grinder. This is not a super expensive endeavor, but if you don't have a shop, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a bench grinder in your living room. So that said, this thing spins. I fill it with compound, which is really important to this video. This is called honing compound or polishing or buffing compound. It goes by all of those names, but I'll link that in the description because I think it really does matter which product you use. This is a green compound. That means it's kind of a medium to aggressive cut, so it does remove a lot of material, which I like. So it makes quick work of the polishing. So you'll touch this up against the wheel. This thing is loud. Now I'll turn it on. You push it up against, makes a big cloud of dust, which is probably awful for you to breathe in, which is why I wear a mask when I'm doing this. Anyway, you dress the wheel with the polishing compound, and what that does, fills the buffing wheel with compound, and it acts almost like sandpaper, but really, really fine, and it polishes the tool. What's nice about the cotton wheel, this one's actually pretty far gone, and well, this is a problem. This actually got caught in the knife that I was sharpening. Very, very dangerous to polish knives with a buffing wheel. In fact, I don't even recommend it because it's just so often that this thing will catch. It'll spit the tool down, and at worst, it'll actually spit the tool in your face. One guy I know was taking a class from a friend of mine, was pushing the tool into the buffing wheel, had the cutting edge facing the wrong way. So it caught the tool, spit it up at his face. Apparently the instructor, my buddy, had the guy take his hands off of his face. Hands were like this, right? Holding his nose. Pulled his hands away, and a pool of blood just fell onto the ground. And apparently his nose was hanging off of his face. So if that's not reason enough for you to pay attention to the direction of the spin of this thing, you always want the cutting edge to go in the direction of the arrow, right? Or away from the movement. So in other words, if it's going this way, I want the cutting edge to go downward or in the same direction as the arrow. Right? That's the idea. If you cut up in, it's going to grab the tool, spit it out at you. Bad, bad, bad stuff. I like the Strop. The problem is with it, if we're getting the technical talk here, I try not to do this too much, but the bevel gets rolled over. So it's simple. I mean, really the idea is that when you go over this edge, right, there's the heel of the cutting edge here, and there's the cutting edge of the edge right here at the tip. And sometimes the softer surfaces that you bump this up against will take that edge and make it kind of belly, because the material kind of comes over the edge like so, kind of wraps around. Since it's soft, it's more pliable. As you press it against this wheel, the wheel is going to give, and it's going to roll that edge. It's not always a bad thing though, because if you've got a slightly broader, let's say my fingers represent the edge, right? These two fingers. If I've got a really thin bevel, it's a little bit more likely to break. In other words, if the edge is very long and thin, not as strong. But if it's a little bit shorter and a little bit more round, not super round, you don't want a big bellied edge like this, but if it's a little bit rounder, it gives the edge a little bit of rigidity. So I've noticed, at least, it's not necessarily a bad thing to use the buffing wheel. You just don't want to push the blade in such a way to where it rolls it over too much. So you want to go parallel to the wheel, like so. You don't want to stick it in. Okay? Now, if you don't have that stuff, one way that you can strop your tools is by taking the honing compound, rubbing it on a piece of wood. You don't need to have a fancy strap. Guys, I have 5 or 6 strops laying around that I don't even use in that bench. A piece of wood is totally fine. Just rough up the surface of that wood with a 100 grit sandpaper. Take the honing compound, rub it on that, and just drag your blade across. Look at this, guys. Come on. Whoa! Of course, it's hard to do this in film. You probably want to hold the piece of wood that you're stropping with while you're doing this, or clamp it down. But either way, see that black stuff? That's the metal coming off of the blade onto that surface. So it's really this compound that does the magic, and a flat, hard surface that has a little bit of tooth to it, in other words, it's a little bit roughed up, is going to be great. You do not need fancy strops, okay? If you want to get on the inside bevel of a tool that's hard to get on the inside bevel of, because when you have a tool like a V tool, for instance, you want to get on the inside and the outside of the cutting edge, you can just push the tool into a piece of wood, like I've done here, and that gives us this profile. I don't know if you can see that little profile, that edge. If I rub the compound on this, I can then take the tool, apply it to the wood, and just drag it away. And that's going to catch the inside bevel. That's going to sharpen this edge. So you don't have to have fancy tools. Once again, if, say for instance, because I can just hear some of you out there like, yeah, but what do I do if I don't have the fancy sanding, shaping tool, and my tools are super dull? My tools are super dull, Alec. I've got an answer for you. Just a piece of sandpaper. Tape it to a hard surface. This is a glass desk. This is just some painter's tape. Take that tool, drag it over the surface. Yeah, it's going to remove material. You just want to match the bevel of the tool. So I don't know if I have any tools that are super dull here for to use as an example. I guess this guy will have to be the example. You're just going to drag it, and you're going to turn the blade. Find that bevel. The heel usually is distinct. This is a really long bevel. It's kind of hard to find. But it's usually at the base of the tool, at the cutting edge rather, and then the tip. You want it to lay flat in that zone. So the slight angle, little pickup. You're going to drag it. If it's a gouge, give it a slight turn as you pull it away from you. And you're just going to repeat that a few times. You're going to check the edge. You do not want to be able to see the edge of the tool. Really important to have a nice light nearby you when you're doing this. If you can see the edge, it means that you're probably needing to grind the tool down a bit more. Okay, that said, once you've done that with your 220 grit sandpaper, if your tool's really bad, or maybe say your 600 grit if it's not so bad, come over here to your stropping wood, rub that compound on there nice and heavy. I'm not doing it as heavily as I would normally because I'm on camera and I'm trying to do this as I'm holding the phone, but rub that on there nice and heavy. Apply that tool that you've just sanded. Same thing, keep it flat against the bevel, flat. You don't want to hike that angle up. In other words, you don't want to lift that tool up like so. It's going to be a problem. You want to leave that bevel flat against the wood and just drag it across. Just drag it across. Both sides, then the other way. Okay, that's that. So that's how I address tools without, or rather how I sharpen without having all these fancy sharpening tools. So I'm going to get back to it. I've got a lot to sharpen here. I hope this helped a little bit for some of you who struggle with sharpening. I mean, it took me 9 years to learn to sharpen, and I feel like it took me more time to learn to sharpen than it did to learn to carve a decent face. So keep that in mind. Don't be too hard on yourselves. And with that being said, Take your vitamins. Have a good day. Be blessed.